Great. Hello, everybody. Thanks this evening for joining us in the Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. And as people are joining us, sometimes it takes a while. Computers sometimes don't want to be as cooperative as we want them to be. So we're going to diddle-dally just for a few minutes as more people join us. But for those of you that are signing in with us, let us know where you are joining us from. I am actually sitting in Ashland, Wisconsin this evening. I recently moved from Alaska to Rhinelander, Wisconsin, but tonight I am sitting in Ashland, Wisconsin, where the fall is beautiful.
What brought you to Ashland? I used to teach at Northland College.
I saw that. That was one of the things I was remembering.
Yeah.
So I am in Ashland, Wisconsin, because I was facilitating a meeting of Forest Service employees. And those Forest Service employees were meeting at the Northern Great Lakes Visitor Center.
Great. Yeah.
And I have to say, Ashland is just the most cute. It's the cutest town. And they have a great coffee shop, a couple great coffee shops. But I don't know, Paul, when the last time you were in Ashland was, but all of their trash containers on their sidewalks are done in a, it's not stained glass. What is that? A mosaic.
Mm-hmm.
It's like collages of all sorts of different art materials on their trash cans. It's just beautiful.
Hi, I'm Janice Jeanette. I live in Lubbock, Texas.
Great, thanks for joining us, Janice. And I see Juanita Baker has joined us and Mary Dresser. And just, type in the chat where you're calling from, what's fall like for you. At Minneapolis, Paul, you probably have been enjoying fall.
Yeah, there's a lot of beauty in the trees right now. I'd say we're probably halfway through at least. Some of the trees have lost all their leaves. Some are still beautiful. But we're also in a severe drought in the Twin Cities here. So that's having an effect on everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing how that makes a difference in the fall colors. So folks, thanks for joining us this evening. You've joined Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. We're going to get started in about 30 seconds. If you want to type into the chat where you're calling in from, we would love to hear it. We got somebody from Texas, from Florida, Sebastian, Florida. I'm jealous, the birds are migrating. All right. And I am going to start with an overview of Environment for the Americas. So as people continue to join us, I will just get started with a little overview of Environment for the Americas. And welcome again to the Bird Book Club. We do these every month so that we have the opportunity to chat with various authors and the cool things they do as far as bird books and bird topics and touching on things related to birds. So we appreciate the time and energy that all of our authors take to join us this evening. And Environment for the Americas, we are the headquarters, so to speak, of World Migratory Bird Day, but that's not all we do. We connect diverse people to nature and bird conservation, and we do that through a variety of ways. And if I can advance my screen, I will tell you more about us. There we go. So we really work hard to unify our voices for birds and their conservation. And in unifying our voices, I mean, all of our voices. So we really work hard to reach out to people like you and to people in a variety of areas and situations so that we can unify all of our voices and really work for the conservation of birds and their habitats. So we do that in a variety of ways, as I mentioned. We do attend a bunch of conferences, and those are sometimes global. We collect global data to help us understand what's going on with birds and their populations and their habitat movements and their migration. We participate in local surveys, so really thinking about ways that we can, not only do the local, but the regional, the continental, and then the global. We create a lot of educational materials and community outreach to help people know what we're doing. We want everybody to understand what it is that we do and who we work with. And who we work with includes a lot of partners. So not only federal agencies, but state agencies, nonprofit organizations, businesses, universities, schools, and other organizations that have some kind of stake or some kind of interest in birds and their conservation. As I mentioned, World Migratory Bird Day is one of our big emphasis. We coordinate that with the Convention on Migratory Species and the Agreement on Conservation of African Eurasian Migratory Water Birds. So together, we highlight what's going on in the bird world and focus on migration, not only in the springtime, but in the fall. So because birds know no boundaries, it really takes that huge effort to be able to share information with people and really think about how can we conserve birds and think about ways that our day-to-day actions impact birds. And I'm excited about tonight's book because Paul Bogard mentioned some of the things that we can do related to birds. And so we very much view this phenomenon of bird migration to serve as a call to action to help protect birds that we all share and all of the things that we can do to help birds. We participate in a lot of organizations and partnerships that do very specific bird-focused work, such as the Western Hummingbird Partnership. And so that's a collaboration across North America to really motivate people to do actions to save hummingbirds. And we do this raising the awareness through trainings and public events and workshops and getting people and organizations engaged and really focusing on the research that helps tell us what's going on with hummingbirds. So we do all of this through grants and monies that come from donors and money that comes from people like you and from the work that we do in our bird conservation shop. So we produce a lot of materials in a lot of different languages, and those are available in our shop. Many of those are free and downloadable for you to use in your situations, but we also have things that you can purchase. And as we're heading into the holiday seasons, please remember us when you're thinking about what kind of gift to give to your loved ones, to your teachers, to the people in your lives. The shop has a lot of great things that you can share with your folks. It's one of my go-tos when I think about the shopping that I want to do for the people that I need to go shopping for. So we want very much for you, in addition, and thank you for joining us in our bird book club, but we want you to become a friend and we want you to share it with your friends. We want you to stay in touch. There are a variety of ways to do that. You can follow us on social media. You can visit our website. You can participate in webinars and workshops and events that we have. And you can continue to join us in the Bird Book Club. So I just wanted to make sure that you have kind of a basic, and so I see a lot of familiar names here. So some of you that have already participated or participate regularly in our Bird Book Club, thank you again for joining us. But I just want to make sure you have an idea of who Environment for the Americas is and what we do for birds. And again, my name is Alicia King. I am a volunteer for Environment for the Americas. So I have a day job and then I do this kind of thing for fun. And I'm very excited this evening, and please do continue to put where you're coming from or what you're thinking in the chat beside you. But I'm very excited to talk to Paul Bogard this evening. And as we go through this evening, Paul's going to do a little reading for us, and then we're going to go into discussion, questions and answers. If you have questions that you want to ask, put them in the chat, and I'll kind of moderate that as we go through our evening. I'll either ask the question of Paul or ask you to come on and unmute yourself and ask the question of Paul yourself, if that's comfortable for you. So I was telling Paul earlier that as I read his book, I thoroughly enjoyed one of the reviews that's on the jacket of his book is the terrific, moving, poetic, immersive, multifaceted, and thought-provoking book. And as I read this, so much of this read like poetry. And when I looked at Paul's bio on the jacket, he teaches creative nonfiction at James Madison University in Virginia. And I'm like, I want to take his class. Can I sign up for your class, Paul? Can I join you? So he's the editor of the anthology, Let There Be Night, a testimony on behalf of the dark. And one of the things that I think about a lot, especially considering our theme for this year, has to do with turning the lights off for birds so that they can migrate. That resonated with me throughout your book, Paul. I enjoyed the things that you talked about. And I had to laugh because at my home, I'm temporarily in an apartment, and there are lights every 5 feet along every edge of my building that I'm in. And one of the first things that we did when we moved in was I asked my husband, who's rather tall, to just unscrew the light bulbs a little bit to turn the lights off. We sit up on an edge of the woods, and I just didn't want the lights on. So he unscrewed them so that we'd be a little bit in the dark. So again, thanks everybody for joining us. Put where you're coming from, any questions or thoughts you have as we're having this conversation with Paul into the chat. And Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you and welcome again. Thanks for being here with us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you, and thanks for having me. And thank you to everybody who's joined tonight. I'm actually coming to you from Minneapolis. I was in Virginia for 8 years at JMU, but now I've been back in my home city of Minneapolis. I teach at Hamline University in St. Paul now. But that doesn't change my love for night or darkness or birds or anything like that. It's just good to be home again. I think what I'll do is just start with a really short reading from the book, relatively early in the book. One of the things that I talk about sometimes when I'm presenting on the issue is that I was really lucky. I grew up in Minneapolis, and we have a cabin up in the northern part of the state. And so all my life, I've been able to go to a place where there's still, especially when I was a kid, but even now it's pretty dark. And I got to have a real firsthand experience with natural darkness and natural night. And when I often get the question, how did you end up writing this book? And I always go back to that childhood experience. And then I've had some sort of, once in a lifetime experiences as well that have contributed to, I guess, my journey with this issue and certainly to the book. So I'll read one of those once in a lifetime experiences, and then I'm happy to read other places too if people are interested or as we go along. But this comes from early in the book. It's on page 31. The most beautiful starry night I've ever seen was more than 20 years ago when I was backpacking through Europe as an 18-year-old high school graduate. I had traveled south from Spain into Morocco, and from there south to the Atlas Mountains at the edge of the Sahara Desert. to a place that when I look on a map, I can no longer find, where nomadic tribes come in from the desert to barter and trade. One night in a youth hostel that was more like a stable, I woke and walked out into a snowstorm. But it wasn't the snow I was used to in Minnesota or anywhere else I'd been. Standing bare chest to cool nights, wearing flip-flops and shorts, I let a storm of stars swirl around me. I remember no light pollution. I remember no lights, but I remember the light around me, the sense of being lit by starlights, and that I could see the ground to which the stars seemed to be floating down. I saw the sky that night in 3 dimensions. The sky had depth, some stars seemingly close, some much farther away. The Milky Way so well defined, it had what astronomers call structure, that sense of its twisting depths. I remember stars from one horizon to the other, stars stranger in their numbers than the wooden cart full of severed goat heads I'd seen that morning, making a night sky so plush, it still seems like a dream. So much was right about that night. It was a time of my life when I was every day experiencing something new. I felt open to everything, as though I were made of clay and the world was imprinting upon me its breathtaking beauty. Standing nearly naked under that Moroccan sky, skin against the air, the dark, the stars, the night pressed its impression, and my lifelong connection was sealed. So like I said, that's kind of that was a once in a lifetime experience of being out in the desert in Morocco, absolutely no artificial lights for miles and miles around. And then in the desert with the much drier air, the night sky tends to be more vibrant. It's strange. I wrote this book and I've been involved with this issue for several years. And those nights are just, they don't come along very often. So it's one I'll never forget.
Thanks, Paul. And I'm going to just there we go. Sorry about that, folks. It's sometimes hard to find the unmute button. I just wanted to invite folks, if you want to come on camera, feel free to turn your cameras on so that Paul's looking at faces instead of names. Names are nice. We've got some people joining us from an Audubon Society in Florida. And we've got people, somebody from Texas. There are a lot of Phoenix, Arizona, Pelicans are back there. So please feel free to turn on your cameras if you'd like to. So Paul, one of the things that I was thinking about as I was reading your book was you have, we did talk earlier that you taught at a small college in Ashland, which is where I'm sitting right now. So I'm visiting Ashland for the week. And as I look out on the lake, and I think the town of Ashland has actually done a nice job of not going too overboard with their lights on the lake. But I think about just the brilliance of the stars and the brilliance of the night skies when there are not a lot of lights. And I feel like you do a really good job of capturing that essence in your book. And you mentioned just now in your reading that those kinds of experiences kind of drew you to this. But what else about night? I mean, if you had messages to give to us about the lack of light, what really drew you to being so into it?
I think it does go back to that childhood experience, that firsthand experience. I have a 4-year-old daughter now, so I think a lot about children and the future. And I know that the upbringing that I got to have, I mean, it seems obvious, but it made me who I am. I mean, I love the biggest motivator for me in in this subject is the ecological or environmental impacts of light at night. So birds, of course, but really up and down the food chain, as we say, from tiny insects to larger animals. There's a helpful way to think of things is that all life on Earth evolved with bright days and dark nights, and so we need that light, we need that sunshine, but we also need darkness. And so even if we haven't, which is really the case, we have only really begun in the last decade or two to study the impacts of artificial light on life at night, whether it's human beings or other life. I think it's we're on fairly good footing to say that artificial light at night is probably not great for that life. That nothing has evolved to live with that light, so those impacts can be pretty dramatic. And I think that I have always, I'm lucky in many ways, but I have always, for me, night has always been a time of beauty outside. Whether I'm up north and seeing the stars and hearing the loons and or even in the city, the suburbs where I grew up had wonderful crickets, insects, and also a time of calm, of quiet, a time of I sometimes think of the days when I'm in the city is just full of speed and sound and noise, and night is a time of where I can kind of breathe again and hear myself again, and a lot of times just have that pleasure of reading and writing and looking out the window at the moon and that kind of thing. So again, I'm lucky to have had that experience. I'm fortunate, and it just, as I thought about some years ago, what could I write about? What could I make a book about? One of the things I was doing was teaching myself the constellations, which I had never really learned. And I very quickly saw that when the books, at that time, it was all books. It wasn't computers so much, but the books were telling me I could see these constellations, and then I would walk outside and I couldn't see them because of all the light in the sky. And then pretty quickly after that, I began to understand all the other impacts from light pollution, including the environmental, ecological impacts. So it is a subject that's close to me because of my love of night, but also because of the impacts to our fellow creatures.
Thanks for that, Paul. I have Juanita Baker has asked something in the chat, but hold on, Juanita. I want to kind of go through, she's saying she hasn't read the book and she kind of wanted to summarize the main points, which is, of course, what we're talking about as hi, Kitty, which is kind of what we're talking about, when we have these conversations with our authors. But Paul, you organized, and we will get to you, Juanita, as far as what you're asking, I think, through some of these questions. But you wrote your book a little differently. You kind of flipped it. So it's almost like you started at the end and then went to the beginning, or it was like you numbered your chapters kind of backwards. And as I was looking through them, or as I was reading, I didn't even really catch on to that until I was like halfway through, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, what chapter am I on? What's going on here? But one of the things that I love that you did in your book, and Juanita, when you are asking, how can we bring the Milky Way back to us? Paul has a number of things in the book that you should probably, Paul, be telling us instead of me, but that describe some of that light stuff, that lightness, and the work that you've done with Flap and the Toronto, lights, just that whole impact that lights have on us. But one of the things I really enjoyed about your book was that you talk about things, when we think about, how do we get the Milky Way back to us? It's about, for me, behavior change. How do we change people's thoughts and minds about light? And one of the things that you did on page 79 or 78, actually, you shared some photographs of the difference between light and dark and as it relates to humans. And you were talking about the issue of safety. And so, it's been so drilled into us that if we want to protect ourselves, we have to have light, lots of light. And I loved that in this particular chapter, you talk a little bit about that. And you have some stats that share with us that that's not necessarily true. Are we safer with more lights? Or are we perhaps in some situations safer without lights? Do you want to expand on that or share on that? And again, going back to that behavior change, and how do we bring back the Milky Way to us by, thinking about how can we influence people?
Yeah, it's an important subject. I'm glad you brought us to that. I think the chapter, what Alicia is referring to is that the book starts with chapter 9 and it works its way down to chapter 1, and that mimics something called the Bortle scale, which is basically a scale of levels of darkness, with 9 being our brightest places and 1 being natural darkness. And so the book starts with chapter 9, and I start off in Las Vegas and Times Square and some very bright places, intensely bright places, and work my way down to some darker places by the end of the story. And the first 2 chapters are a little in London and Paris and a couple other places, kind of with some history and thinking about that a little bit. But in the 3rd chapter, so chapter 7, is all about this issue of safety and security. Because when you talk to people about light pollution, or our use, what a good definition of light pollution is our overuse and misuse of artificial light at night. So nobody is, we're not talking about not having lights at night. That isn't, it's how we're using them, as, this idea of behavior and how we can change behavior. And one of the big problems is that we've been taught to, and are continually taught, that light is good and dark is bad, and light is safety and dark is dangerous, and so on, and what I like to say is that at the very least, it's way more complex than that. There are, times when it's good to have some light, times when it's probably better to have mostly darkness. But we get into this situation where we think because some light helps us to be safer and more secure, that ever more light will make us ever more safe and secure. And that equation breaks down pretty quickly. So the 2 pictures that Alicia was referring to show the same image of a yard in Tucson. It's a picture of what we call a security light on the side of a house. And then the next image is the same image, but with the photographer holding his hand up to shield that light. And when he does that, then you can see the bad guy who's standing in the fence, where you couldn't even see him before because you were blinded by the lights. And that gets to this point that, light doesn't make us safer automatically. And too much light can actually create shadows where the bad guys can hide, or where somebody's waiting to cross the street as you're driving down the street. You don't see them because they're in the shadows. And probably the worst thing is that bright lights create the illusion of safety. So we see bright lights and we think, oh, it must be safe. But that is definitely not necessarily true. The research is really fairly limited and basically equivocal, meaning that some research says more lighting is good, some says more lighting isn't so good. But the challenge for somebody like me is that we're just so used to the idea that darkness is dangerous and light is safe that we, as I say, we're scared of the dark. We're afraid of the dark. And so we have a hard time listening to the idea that we might not need so much light because we get scared.
So it's interesting, just going back to Ashland, I was walking along the lake path after dinner last night, and there were no lights on the path. And so, of course, right away, it's like, oh, that's kind of a safety thing. There's no lights on the path. So we were kind of, trudging along this path. But as I thought about it, I looked out and I'm like, the lake is so cool at night, and the stars, you could see the dipper, and it was just so brilliant. And then as we were headed up the stairs to go back to our hotel, the haunted hotel, the Schwambigan Hotel, I thought, well, they probably should have some lights, at least on the stair steps. So, what you're saying is so true. Safety comes in different forms.
Yeah, and I would say again, it isn't a question of we're going to have lights or not lights. It's really a question of, let's have thoughtful, intelligent lighting. The question from Juanita about, how do we bring the Milky Way back? We could, cut the problem of light pollution in half overnight just by shielding, if we could wave a magic wand and shield all the lights that exist right now, so they're just going down to the ground, it would cut the problem in half. And a good example that toward this issue of safety and security is that, a light that is shining up into the sky, and there's far too many of those, isn't making anybody any safer, right? It's not lighting anything, right? So let's stop doing that. That's just a dumb way to use light, and let's make the light go down to where we need it, so we can see where we're walking, that kind of thing. Rather than too often we just kind of blast it all in lots of different directions.
And I'm looking to see if we have feel free, folks, to put your questions in the chat. Let us know if you want to come on and ask the question yourself. You talk a little bit about in your book about the light and the impacts that it has. And you have a lot of good examples of buildings and people that you've worked with and things that information that you've gathered to kind of build your case for the light, so we don't end night. So we don't have the end of night. But you have I can't remember which chapter it is. For those of you that join our book clubs regularly, that I go through and I tag little places that are of particular interest to me. And when you all don't ask questions, I get to ask my question. But you've mentioned a lot of people that you work with, Michael Masur, a Flap, and Sydney Guthrow from Clemson University. And I'm fascinated by how much you have put in this book so how long did it take you to gather all of this information and pull this all together and formulate this?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a trick question, just because I think this is true for a lot of authors with their first book. In some ways, you've been working on it all your life, and so it's hard to know kind of when things came, when they came, but over a series of years, certainly. I think, intensely, it was probably from the time I got the book contract to the time I turned it in, and I had a year to put everything together. But I had probably done a lot of the research, or at least some of the research before that. And then the big task, I guess, two big tasks.
Your co-author?
Yep, the little author is here. There she is. Hi. The two big tasks were the travel, which was great. I got to go to a lot of places, and then of course the writing takes a lot of time to do. But in terms of the research, I had a head start just from a lifetime of kind of learning about this and reading about the subject.
Yeah, well, I as I had mentioned when we spoke earlier, I'm like, oh yeah, Michael, I worked with him in FLAP, and in fact, we have a question in the chat about lights out. So perfect segue. So, sorry, let me find Janice. Janice, do you want to come on and ask your question of Paul, or do you want me to ask it? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and ask it unless Janice comes on.
I'm sorry.
There she is.
Yes, and I don't have the details, and I don't remember all the information about it, but I have heard of lights out nights in some areas, and I've seen it advertised or come across the Houston Audubon bird chat email list. And I know it's a good thing, but I know that not all cities have done it, and I'm not sure how it would be started in a particular city. Like, do you have to start with the city government, or is it just a group of people, like a groundswell, that would be willing to do that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Thank you for it. The Lights Out programs are really important, and some cities have them, some don't. Obviously, some are really effective, some are less effective. Let's see. The basic concept is that the bulk of migration happens during certain weeks of the year, in the fall and the spring, although there's migration happening around the year. One of the really neat things that's been happening just in the last few years is that with the use of weather radar to track bird migration, we're honing in on really when the most intense periods are for birds. And so one of the challenges with Lights Out programs has been, if you ask a building owner or city, citywide, or whoever you're asking to turn out their lights for 2 months, in the fall and 2 months in the spring, that might be a big ask. But if you could come to them and say, hey, we know that the next 10 days are going to be the most intense period for bird migration here. Would you be willing to, turn out or turn down the lights during that time? The hope is that people might be more receptive to that. And so again, we're learning when are those really intense times of migration, when are the most birds going through specific places. And it's such this issue of light pollution and birds is such a good one to talk about, because these creatures have not ever evolved to deal with lights. They're just not used to them, and especially the birds that are born up north, for example, and are making their first flight south in the fall tend to really have a hard time because they've just never navigated the gauntlet of those lights. And it's such a shame because these lights are most of them unnecessary. They're just lights left on in buildings and, lights shining up into the sky. And again, it just has so little to do with human safety or really what we need. And at the same time, we're just wreaking havoc on the birds. So a lot of the birds that fly into windows during the day were actually drawn into those urban areas or suburban areas by lights at night. So there's a connection there as well. And I would say in terms of, if you live in a place that you'd like to get involved, there may already be an Audubon group or another group that have put together a Lights Out effort And if not, there are several good ones to contact to kind of say, hey, how did you do this? How could we do this? And kind of follow their lead. You don't, in other words, you don't have to reinvent the wheel if your area doesn't already have a lights out program.
So Paul, one of the things when I lived in Washington, D.C., we had a lights out program, and we went around and monitored the, in the spring migration and fall migration, we monitored bird kills. So we would walk around, in the very early morning and, pick up any birds and count them and then, use that data to help us figure out, well, what buildings are the ones that we should be most concerned about. And to your point of the young birds in the fall, we found that in DC, the majority of the birds seem to be first year birds that were flying into these windows. And you're right, windows that were left, lights that were left on in the buildings when nobody was in the building. We have a question from Donna, and Donna is going back, I think, to, when you were younger and with your child. She's adorable, by the way. Gosh. Can you bring her back? But she says, as children, we were so fascinated to be outdoors at night to search for lightning bugs. And we had a real sense of play in nature. And we seemed to lose that memory. Did you, she's asking of you, did you find when you were outdoors at night, did you have a sense of play and wonder? So she's asking, if that was your when you were a kid, that sense of wonder, was that part of what you felt?
Oh yeah, I'm sure that it was. I mean, I definitely have memories of. I think I say in the book, my first memory is being 4 or 5 and standing on the dock at the lake in northern Minnesota, looking at satellites move through sugary spreads of stars, I think is the phrase I use. Just when lots of stars with my dad, and always, hearing the loons and occasionally a wolf and, that kind of thing, just a lot of wonder at the stars. I would also say too, that I've also been kind of afraid of the dark all my life, that it's a natural human condition, I guess I would say, to be afraid of the dark. It's just that I've, learned that we don't have to try to then light up everything so that we feel safe again, right? Those things can coexist, that you can have a natural fear of the dark and love darkness and appreciate the many qualities that it brings. And the other thing I guess I would say is that one of the most stark estimates that I found while I was doing research for the book was the estimate that 8 of 10 kids born in the US today will never live where they can see the Milky Way. So we've created this situation where 80% or just at least the majority of children growing up in the US now are living where they can't see the Milky Way. They don't have a sense of, if that's a gauge of kind of a natural night, they're not having that experience. And I think the comment is such a good one because it speaks to this experience that I would guess a lot of people in the room tonight have had of growing up and, running around in the neighborhood, and night is, not necessarily a scary thing, versus now, I think for a lot of kids, you go inside at night and you don't come out again, and darkness is seen as dangerous, and some places it may very well be a dangerous time. So we've really without this firsthand experience, this firsthand experience of darkness in childhood, we're really missing out on something. And as with anything, you know, if you don't know about something, it's hard to care about it. So these, you know, unfortunately, people who don't get to experience a real night are far less likely to worry that we're losing it.
So it's a great point. If they've missed out on night, they don't know what they're missing out on because they're not familiar with it. So one of the things that I want to ask you has nothing to do with birds. Sorry, folks. we're gonna sidetrack a little from birds in my little roll of questions that I'm going to ask. But bats. So, are you afraid of bats? Mm-hmm. And when we think about bats, what's the light doing to bats? I know that when I lived in Florida, we asked all the hotels to turn off their lights so that the sea turtles wouldn't confuse the reflection on the ocean, you know, with the lights on the hotels. And if it was dark behind them, then they would head toward the ocean, you know, rather than toward the hotels. Bats are a little more of a mystery to me and how light impacts them. And so my first question was, are you afraid of bats? Or what in your research and what you've been talking about as far as this light night stuff, how about bats?
I love bats. I think bats are amazing creatures. I think they get an entirely undeserved bad rap with a lot of people. I remember, I mean, I can, you know, when you study bats, you find out how amazing they are, and you learn pretty quickly that they're, you know, for a creature that's navigating by echolocation at night, looking for and finding insects as they fly through the sky, they're not going to fly into your head. Like, that's not, you know, it just doesn't make any sense. And so, but I do remember a night in Death Valley National Park at dusk, and I was sitting there, and there were a number of bats, and they were starting to fly around. I was sitting on the hood of my car, and they were flying around the hood, maybe because of the warmth of the engine, I don't know, but, you know, they were getting a little close, and it, you know, it does raise, again, kind of some natural apprehension, I guess I'd say. But no, I really love bats. I respect them. They're, you know, there's more than 1,000 different species of bats, and so it's hard to talk about them in generalities. But what scientists have found so far is that, you know, for a lot of bats, artificial light at night is light pollution is not a good thing. It's messing with their what they've evolved to depend on the darkness. For some bat species, it seems like it's either not so bad or that it actually can be of benefit to them. But I think in general, the effect that light pollution has on bats is that it attracts their insect prey, and the insects will, you know, be hoovered up out of the ecosystem. You know, they'll fly around the lights until they drop dead from exhaustion or fly into the lights, that kind of thing. And it impacts bats because that they're being taken out of the food chain, essentially. So that's a real problem for bats and for anything that relies on any birds that are insectivores, for example. I see there's a question from Juanita about lights and carbon emissions. Yes. Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think that, you know, a lot of the electricity that power the lights is from coal that's being burned, and there is a connection between carbon emissions and light pollution. A good place to find out more about that and everything really is the International Dark Sky Association, darksky.org. And I think they have the latest numbers on that kind of thing for sure. I think there would be a significant reduction in carbon emissions if we were to control our use of lights, but I don't know how significant at this point.
Thanks for answering that.
Would help save our birds too.
for sure.
So, Paul, one of the things that you have in your book, I love the way this book is formatted. I do like the way the chapters read. And then at the end, there are also questions for topics and for discussion. And I'm like, oh, darn, that was the question I was going to ask. And so I tried not to ask the same questions. I tried to look at it with a little bit of a different lens. But one of the things that you have in the back of your book that kind of intrigued me a little bit is you have 6 nights Paul would like to see. What's that list about? You've got, I don't know if you have your book in front of you. I can.
You better repeat them for me. I don't know.
I can read them.
Yeah.
So for folks that have the book, it's just, toward the end of the book. And if you haven't if you've not yet purchased this book, highly recommend it. And it really is I just love your writing style, Paul. I just was thrilled to read this book. So you have 6 nights Paul would like to see: Paris before electric light with the Milky Way bending overhead. 2, they're not numbered, but somewhere in the middle of the ocean on a calm, clear night, stars rising from one horizon and setting in the other, all mirrored on the water. I'm going to mess this name up, but in Chile, there is the Atacama Desert.
Mm-hmm.
You'd like to see that.
Yeah.
The Serengeti Plain in Kenya during the annual mammal migration, the night sky accompanied by the sounds of lions, hyenas, wildebeest, and more. And then our Minnesota lake, hundreds of years before my birth, your birth, not mine. And then Morocco when I was 18. So those are the 6 nights that you list in your book. So what made you list those?
That's a great question. I haven't looked at that list in a long time, and I love it. It's a great list. Whoever made that list is it's got a lot going for him. Yeah, I think so a couple of those questions are kind of related: the Paris question and the lake question, just wanting to go back into the past and see places that I love before electric lighting came. So Paris is, super evocative nowadays, but if there's actually some artwork, some images, I can't remember who did them, of the Milky Way over Paris. And I saw those and I thought, wow, I wish I would love to see that. Yeah, going back into the past to that night, that where we started tonight, the night in Morocco when I was 18. I'm grateful that I can still sort of see it in my head. Let's see, what else? What were the other ones? The Atacama Desert in Chile. Just again, a desert setting, and it's one of the driest places on the planet. And there's one of the world's big telescopes is down there. So it is a place that people go to see the stars. I've heard a lot about it. I think I'd like to go there. And the ocean. Yeah, that's just over the years when I've been giving talks, the number of times that I've heard from people, who, and it's generally older folks, but I've had people say, we were coming back from a trip, or I was in the service, and I was on night watch on a ship, and all the lights were out, and that's where I saw the most amazing stars. And it makes, a lot of sense. It's, if you look at, there's something called the World Atlas of the Artificial Night Sky Brightness, which is essentially an atlas of light pollution. And you get out into the ocean and it's naturally dark. It's just beautifully dark. And I would love to see that somewhere, like I said, on one of those calm nights. So yeah, that's a great list.
Not sure how I got muted again, but I love your list, and it makes me want to make a list.
Yeah.
I love walking on the beach at night when the moon is out and all I'm hearing is the sound of the surf, and there's not much noise or light going on. I love driving through the woods at night when there are no lights except for my headlights, and I'm driving through and the trees are overhead. I have spent quite a bit of time doing the Lights Out program and volunteering, to pick up birds and that sort of thing. And it can be a little depressing. But I feel like Juanita had the question earlier about how do we bring the Milky Way back? And some of that is that awareness. And as you mentioned, not everybody knows the dark or has experienced the dark. If you had words of wisdom for us, for all of us, for Mary, Janice, Liz, Donna, Judy, Michael, the folks that are here with us this evening, what would your words of wisdom be for ways that we could touch the lives of others to help bring some of that wonder back about night and just kind of, pick people's awareness of maybe we don't need all those bright lights, or ways that we can contribute to helping in this, let's get the night back. We do not want to see the end of night. I love the book, but I don't want to see the end of night.
Yeah, I think, if folks are in a position to bring other people out into the night, that's a great way to do it, especially, as I was saying before, if we can bring out children and give them that firsthand experience of being out at nights, that's really a great way to help, getting educated yourself and helping to educate others. Just so many people have grown up in places where they're just swamped in artificial light, and they don't, as we were saying before, they don't know what they're missing, and they think that this is how, that clouds are supposed to be white at night, right? That they're supposed to be lit up. They just don't, they don't know what the full moon really looks like when there's no lights out. We just haven't had that experience. So doing whatever you can to invite them out and help give them a little bit of that experience. Sharing my book and books like it can, to people who love reading is a good way to do it. And as I said, visiting darksky.org is a great organization with lots of different information and ways to get involved. But it really is, this issue has grown a lot just in the last few years. More people know about it, but there's still so many people who really haven't had that don't know about it. And the neat thing is that in a lot of cases, the minute that you point out to them, that light that's shining straight into the sky, or that light that's shining right into your bedroom at night, or the fact we can't see the Milky Way, a lot of people will say, wow, I never saw that, but now I do. It's kind of that instant sense of learning about this issue. So it can be real gratifying in that way.
Thank you for that, Paul. And I was actually looking for the page that had that. I highly recommend, if you haven't had a chance, a lot of people do come on that haven't really read the book yet, but if you haven't had a chance to read the book, you do have a beautiful style of writing, and it would make a great gift for anybody. Along with, could you imagine giving this book with a telescope and a little star chart, so that they could look up into the night sky? Mm-hmm. But go back to page 78 if you're curious about some of that security, safety stuff, and being able to provide some education to people is important. But this doesn't read like an education book. It just it reads like a story, and it's a story that is so worth telling. So Daisy, to help me, do we have books left in our? Yes. So you can go online and order this book. Yep. From us. Environment for the Americas. Thank you folks so much for joining us this evening. Thank you, Paul, for joining us. And we appreciate your sharing your story. And don't let the things that go bump in the night bother you tonight.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, Alicia.
Yeah. Thank you, Daisy.
Okay.
Thanks for all your work pulling these together.